Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery, brand new series here, which I've chosen to entitle Personal Self-Defense Against the Narcissist. The purpose of this particular series is understand the manipulation process as well as to look within yourself to see exactly what about you may have contributed to becoming targeted by such a monster. And the majority of this information as far as this episode is coming from the same book, Snakes in Suits. Now, this book is written about psychopaths, and they have a section that distinguishes them from the narcissist. And then, as I always say, we don't care about the label because a lot of the techniques are universal, whether you give them this label or that label. So I'm not really here to distinguish, well, if you're dating the psychopath, then do this, but if it's the sociopath, do that, and if it's the no, it's just they all share common sickness. Chapter 10, it's hot buttons and weak spots. And I rarely read stories. I have a few, but we'll begin this one just right so you can actually maybe see your own story within this story. And I was reading, and as I read, I was thinking, yeah, I could imagine how she's feeling. At the same time, split mind is like, oh, I know what this really means. And it's really kind of eerie and sick, but I think it's helpful, though, because it puts things into perspective, because many of us never suspected we'd ever meet an actual person who could be like those evil characters in movies. But let's begin. Once upon a time, there was a lady named Nancy, who was a traveling nurse. She loved this position. Like many travelers, Nancy had put in her time at a major city hospital. She got all the experience she needed, and then, at the age of 32, decided to make a career change. Travelers, she found, got more money and a bit more respect from the medical staff than the regulars. Now, as a young nurse, Nancy was disgusted by the egocentricity of the surgeons she worked with. She had been surprised because when she was a child, she imagined a surgeon to be one way, but then when she actually worked with them, she found they were nothing like she expected. And she often fantasized about why some of them are not sent for psychotherapy, or at least anger management courses. A wise old nursing instructor explained to her, following a public dressing down she received from a doctor, that they act this way, which is nasty, crude, lewd, because of the intense pressure they face every time they cut into a human body. And this witch said, they really do feel for their patients deep down inside, but years of making life and death decisions hardens them, and their only outlet is to act out on the OR. Nancy accepted this explanation for a while, and it helped her deal with the frustration of these monsters. But then she learned about traveling nurses and saw an opportunity to work at her craft, knowing she'd be on the road in a few months. She knew she couldn't change who these doctors were, and it appealed to her that she could change the working relationship between her and them. So she made the switch. Then one day, she met Marshall. They happened to sit next to each other on an airplane while the Nancy girl was moving to her new job in the Midwest, and they just happened to strike up a conversation. As often happens when we find ourselves locked in a seat next to a stranger for a few hours, Nancy started to talk about herself to Marshall. Normally not very talkative, Nancy found herself captivated by this handsome man in a dark gray suit who seemed to take an interest in her. When she found out that he was a physician, she got nervous. And she thought, oh Jesus, not a doctor. But his calm demeanor and friendly smile eased her concerns. Marshall had said, my career choice came late in life. It was difficult juggling schedules and to attend my classes in the labs, but my boss understood, and probably because he was a veteran too. And of course, her response was, you were in the war? Oh. And then she figured maybe he's older than she suspected. And he, of course, said, well, for a short while. But then I got shot down. And she's like, oh my God, she said. He said, yes, well, that's the nature of war. It's truly hell. I couldn't just leave my guys there. I had to save them, he added. And she was like, my dad got a Purple Heart in Vietnam. Did you get one? And then she had said that in an interrupting manner. And Marshall turned towards her and looked at her, smiled briefly, and then he stared coldly. Well, he said, Medal of Honor. And he said it so seriously that Nancy actually feared that she blew it. Because this guy was nice and friendly, and then she asked these few questions, and all of a sudden he's like, Medal of Honor. And so she had said, oh, that's very impressive. And she was still worrying more that she'd blown the whole thing. The opportunity to meet a handsome, decent man. So she says, tell me what happened. Quickly, hoping she can repair this conversation, which she feels has gone the wrong direction. And then at the same time, she just remembered her father was a veteran and never would talk about his combat experience ever. It was too painful. So then she got the idea that she was turning this conversation into a death spiral because of all this. And she figured this was way too painful for this guy, Marshall. And she didn't know what to do to save herself. Well, Marshall was leaning back, and he closed his eyes briefly. And then he went into a bunch of war experience stories for her. She listened very carefully, and she couldn't help but be impressed. And she had pride for the way he could just talk about this, as she remembered her father and how he was. Well, Marshall then said after he got his job as a private pilot, he made some good money. He said that he wanted to help sick people more than ferry rich ones to and from exotic vacation spots. And he rolled his eyes. Now, of course, Nancy was touched, and towards the end of the flight, when Marshall asked for her phone number, she eagerly obliged. Marshall and Nancy dated for about 4 months. While her crazy schedule kept her close to her home, Marshall, who lived and worked 80 miles away, made the trek whenever he could, steal enough time to be with her. He always came with flowers and candy and jewelry or champagne, sometimes a fancy negligee. They went to fancy restaurants. Nancy just loved the attention. Plus, she noticed that the conversations that they were having were different than any she'd ever had with a man. Serious, humorous, lighthearted, and deep. She was very surprised about how much this Marshall knew about the world, people, and medicine. And then, while they're having their discussions and spending their time together, she would often fantasize about the two of them being together. She'd catch herself before she got too carried away. And all of her girlfriends, most of them were nurses, repeatedly had warned her about dating doctors, but she figured they're just jealous. They're just jealous, and if they would have met him, they would have fallen for him, is how she felt. Now, she never told Marshall about her dreams because she was afraid she'd scare him off. Yet, day by day, she felt her commitment to him increasing. She's getting hooked, basically. And judging by his words, she felt he was getting more attracted to her each day as well. And then when he told her he was going to borrow some money to start his own private practice, because he was tired of the long hours that his hospital job required, she became excited at first and then became nervous. Because with his current job, even though it's hectic, at least he could get off sometimes to be with her, and she feared that if he got his own business, she might never see him again. And she thought, maybe I could work in his office as a nurse, in a fantasy. Maybe I could be his business partner. She had loaned him some cash once to pay a medical bill, but she couldn't afford to help him with his new business. So she figured she's going to have to be the office nurse, and then she shook her head out of the fantasy, and so on. Well, with her 4-month assignment ending soon, Nancy hit on the right idea. She, on her own, decided to apply for an OR position at Marshall's hospital. He would be leaving anyway, so there wouldn't be a conflict or potential for embarrassment, but at least she'd be in the same city, and maybe after a few months they could actually move in together. She decided not to mention any of this to him, though. She was in fear that he might misunderstand, go crazy because he fears she wants the commitment C word. She wanted to have a job and her own apartment ready before surprising him one evening with the good news. Yay! Nancy took her cafeteria tray filled with the salad, soup, and tea and went towards a table full of nurses that are at one end of a table. She had interviewed with the medical staff at this Marshall's hospital, and it went really well, and she now wanted to meet some of her potential co-workers. So, As a traveling nurse, she liked the chance to meet new people in a new environment and then get to move on before any insanity develops. "Hi." She approached the group. "Is this seat taken?" And some chick named Rhonda said, "It's yours." The most senior person at the table and the one with the most outgoing personality. "Thanks," said Nancy, sitting down. "I'm Nancy R., an OR nurse, interviewing for blah blah." And they're like, "We know. We got the scoop from HR on all the new travelers." And she pointed to some other lady, and the girl said, "Welcome." As Sally made the introductions around the table, Nancy carefully tried to remember their names, knowing it's very important to do so. Susie had asked, "Have you met any of the crazies yet?" Meaning the OR medical staff, and Nancy had said she was interviewed by Dr. S. He seemed to be decent. And then Dr. H. And then the other girl interrupted. Susie said, "Those are the normals. Wait till you meet the second shift." The other people at the table rolled their eyes. Eventually, though, she had said, "Does Dr. M work on the second shift?" M meaning Marshall, because her curiosity about Marshall was getting the better of her. And Rhonda had said, "Haven't heard of that one. Are you sure he works here?" And she said, Nancy said, "Oh, well, I heard his name mentioned earlier today, and I was just wondering." And then she hoped she hadn't said too much. And then Sandra had said, "We did have an M, Marshall M, on the third shift. He was a transporter, but he doesn't work here anymore." A few of the women at the table visibly stirred at the mention of Marshall, but Sandra continued, "Yeah, he got into a bit of trouble with one of the residents. Don't know any doctor by that name, though. Do you, Sally?" And Sally's like, "No, not since I've been here, which is going on 12 years. Well, Marshall was a looker all right, did an okay job, but always fantasized about being a doctor someday. I think he moved to County General," said this Rhonda lady. So then Nancy was like, "Oh, I must be mistaken." And she was starting to get nervous, and she quickly finished her food and got up to leave and said, "I've got to go see about my new apartment. I got to run," and she ran. And they're like, "We'll see you in 2 weeks." And she agreed. Now, when she got into her car, she pulled out her cell phone and decided to call Miss Marshall, see what's going on. His cell phone rang and rang and rang, and guess what? No answer. And then she realized she doesn't even know his address. Her anxiety grew, so she figured, you know what? I'm going to go to County General Hospital. So Nancy parked in the County General's visitors lot and walked to the main entrance. When her turn came, she told the guard, "Hi, I'm here to see Dr. M. He's a surgeon." The guard flipped through a book, pages, and said, "He's a doctor here?" And he was puzzled at the list on his desk, and she's like, "Yes, I heard he just started here." And the guy says, "Oh, well." And then he looked to the computer screen and typed more and said, "Are you sure about his name?" The guy then said, "Well, we have someone by that name. Looks like the night shift, but he's not your surgeon." The guard looked up, adding, "Sorry, you might want to call his office to get the location." We have quite a few buildings here." So Nancy said thanks and put a fake tight smile across her face and said she'll do that. She headed for the door, then stopped and glanced at her watch. And she turned to go to the coffee shop at the end of the lobby and bought a large cup of tea and a donut. Taking a seat with a view of the entrance, she decided to wait. So, what to do? Having a psychopath or cluster B person in your life can be emotionally draining, psychologically debilitating, and sometimes physically harmful. The authors of the book have stated that they have gotten several letters and emails from individuals who believe a psychopath has victimized them, and they're very detailed in their pleading communications and give a glimpse into the situation. And in some cases, the authors have suggested the police be called, or they refer them to other psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, and so on. The authors claim that over the years they noticed a pattern in the reports from the letter writers and those that they interviewed. Much like psychopaths who operate through a parasitic assessment, manipulation, abandonment process, the targets themselves seem to unwittingly share a parallel response pattern. So in this part, I think it can get fun and interesting, but it's going to outline the development of the psychopath / cluster B / and victim relationship in such a way to enlighten the listener to the traps and pitfalls along the path. The authors believe the best defense against the dark art of psychopathic manipulation is to fully understand how they operate and to take every opportunity to avoid them. So that's what the next episode will start in, because this one's pretty long.
Hi, I am the Narcopath. If you would like a realistic replica of my Virginia, please call the number on the bottom of your screen. May I ask, this replica is not only molded from my own private parts, but you can also put fluid in it, and it will squirt like I do. So, don't pass up on this valuable opportunity. They're selling fast already, so hurry. Call the number on your screen, and you can enter me anytime you want, and I'll work for you.